Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this Total Wellness Tuesday, where we are going to be exploring the relationship between saturated fats, higher levels of cholesterol, and whether or not cholesterol has anything to do at all with heart attacks. So let's go into this, and why this is so important is because we have to understand that the number one killer in basically the world, and certainly in the United States, is heart disease. And when we look at heart disease, one of those metrics is looking at the cholesterol levels. Now, I'll explain in a moment if that even matters based on newer research. But one more thing, and why this is going to be really important for you too, is that heart disease is implicated with the other major causes of mortality, meaning leading to a lower quality of life and also not living as long. So your life expectancy starts to go down and down. The other big thing is this. While people are more worried about their health and their immune system and whether or not they're more susceptible to a poor outcome from getting a particular virus, actually has to do with heart disease. So when we look at those people most susceptible to mortality from this particular virus, it's those with heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. So if we look at that and we say, well, okay, maybe we're not worried about the cholesterol levels. Maybe we're not worried about all of these different management of the disease. Well, now you're in more of an inflamed state. Your immune system is that much more imbalanced, and it's leading to a higher cause of death if you have one of those 3 or 4 previous comorbidities, we'll call them, meaning like there's another disease that you're contending with, cancer being, of course, one of those as well. But we're not saying that's always as much lifestyle-based. Of course, there is a lot of lifestyle-based component to that. So what I wanted to share with you today, and I did a big show on saturated fats before, so I would love you to go back. I'm going to link it up here today. So just go to stephencabral.com/1726 for my previous show on saturated fats. Why this matters is that there's a causal relationship with certain types of saturated fat and more inflammation, and certainly an increase in negative forms of cholesterol, namely low-density lipoproteins, LDL-based cholesterol levels. So again, why this matters is that not every form of fat is created equal. And when we look at these saturated fats and we look at these longer chain fatty acids, what we're looking at is the amount of carbon atoms that are essentially attached to each other. And it seems that the longer 16 plus atoms there are, 14 plus even in some cases, the more detrimental they may be to your health. So let's start to explore this, all right? Because I think you're going to be pretty shocked when you find out, again, whether the total cholesterol number, what that cholesterol level should be, and how it might affect heart disease even matters. So I want to bring this to you because this is really important. There was a large-scale research study published, well, just about 2 years ago, and this is in the British Medical Journal. And I'm going to read this to you. At first glance, not surprising, saturated fat in the diet is associated with an increased risk of heart disease. Now, heart disease would be many things leading to what's called myocardial infarctions. That basically means a heart attack. Clog the arteries, not allowing the blood to flow through, the heart can start to die. So let's look at it like that. Now, however, the study offers a unique twist by teasing out the effects of different types of saturated fatty acids, SFAs. Recent articles have attempted to exonerate saturated fat from its long-time connection with heart disease, questioning if certain types of saturated fatty acids may have a weaker effect on raising blood cholesterol. So I'm going to go on. I'm going to read just a little bit more, and then I'll give you my take on this. This is, by the way, from Harvard's, I believe, nutritional epidemiology-based part of the website, from the school of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And it's based on the British Medical Journal study, which, by the way, included 73,000 women from the Nurses' Health Study and 42,000 men from the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. So pretty large scale. Yes, it is a follow-up study, but pretty large scale study. A lot of great data was taken from this. So let's go on here. Buttered cheese, red meat, and full-fat dairy are high in saturated fat. Some plant-based fats like coconut or palm oil are also rich in saturated fat. However, all of these foods differ slightly in their relative proportions of individual saturated fatty acids. Commonly eaten saturated fatty acids include lauric, myristic, palmitic, and stearic acids. Coconut oil is the richest in lauric acid, whereas butter is the highest in palmitic acid. Both contain smaller amounts of the other fatty acids. The British Medical Journal study examined the association of individual and combined saturated fatty acid intake, lauric acid, myristic, palmitic, and stearic, with heart disease in more than 73,000 women, 42,000 men. The researchers estimated the effects of replacing 1% of daily calories from these fatty acids with the same amount of calories from polyunsaturated fatty acids, which means basically many but not saturated bonds, the carbon atom bonds, and monounsaturated, which is only one, right? So it said, how can we replace those with the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, with whole grain carbs and plant proteins? There was an 18% greater risk of heart disease in the group consuming the highest amount of saturated fatty acids compared to the group consuming the least, with palmitic acid and stearic acid showing the highest risk. When replacing intake of individual saturated fatty acids with the greatest risk reduction was seen when replacing palmitic acid found in palm oil and fatty cuts of red meat and full-fat dairy. How did they get that? Well, they replaced it with healthier versions of fat, and there was an 11 to 12% reduction just with using polyunsaturated fatty acids. Okay, so why was this done in general? Well, they wanted to really break down, are all saturated fats bad? And I'm using that in air quotes. If you're watching on video, you can see that. But they also wanted to see, was there potential benefit with actually adding in some of the other types of saturated fatty acid? And it was pretty interesting because what they found was that lauric acid within coconut oil can actually have some beneficial based properties. And so when they looked at that, they said they wouldn't go overboard with the addition of more and more coconut oil, but they certainly found that replacing that with a higher palmitic, like a palm oil, or stearic-based, which again would be in some red meats, would be a better version. And again, the best would be to include more of the polyunsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, whole grain carbs, and let's call them, you could think of them as sweet potatoes and starches as well. You don't have to use grains if you don't want in your diet. And then more plant-based proteins as well. And maybe that's beans, legumes, could be hemp hearts that I love, things like that. So let's break this down just a little bit more, because you might be saying, well, I don't know that I would increase my polyunsaturated fatty acids. And I agree with you. I really don't think that people should be getting their polyunsaturated fatty acids from plant-based fats that come from a bottle or jar or anything like that. I totally agree with that. So I want to say I'm on board with this. We have to look at this realistically, because although that may not raise blood cholesterol, it could certainly raise inflammatory-based markers in the body and cause toxicity in other ways. So you really don't want to be eating things like fake butter, fake margarines or things like that might contain hardened versions of soy oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, etc. Now, could you get those polyunsaturated fats though from nuts and seeds and things like that in your diet? Absolutely. But again, and again, I will go back, and I'm on record for the last 5 years in this podcast and saying this: nothing will beat monounsaturated fats. There's almost no downside. You can find downsides on saturated fatty acids, and we'll talk about some of those today and some potential benefits. We talked about polyunsaturated fatty acids and really the oxidation that can happen in the cell membranes and in the body. Now, keep in mind, though, you do need a relative balance of polyunsaturated fatty acids to saturated fatty acids in the body, because think of the saturated fatty acids as more of the hard-based molecules in a cell membrane, and think of the polyunsaturated fatty acids as more of the softer. And it's a bilipid membrane with hard fats and soft fats. Too many hard does not allow for basically aerobic-based metabolism in and out of the cell. And then, of course, if you don't have enough of that and the cell membrane membranes too weak with polyunsaturated fatty acids, well, then it becomes more of a catabolic-based environment where the cell membranes can break down at a much faster and higher degree. So it's always about balance. Keep that in mind. We don't want to go overboard. But as I've said before, monounsaturated fats are really difficult to beat. I mean, they honestly are. I'll probably do a separate show just on monounsaturated fats, but just for right now, understand that it's difficult to go wrong with your olives and some olive oil, not overboard on the oils, but certainly some olive oil has been shown to be absolutely beneficial. Olives, of course, more of the whole food. But again, people might not digest olives as well for certain other properties, and they can have some olive oil. Avocado can be a great one. Then, of course, there are other nuts like walnuts and others, macadamia nuts, that can be a great source of monounsaturated fats. So when we look at monounsaturated fats, we can see, and this was a great study. This was done in 2018, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And basically it stated this. All right, studies have looked at whether consuming a diet rich in monounsaturated fatty acids lead to a reduced risk of heart disease, has shown mixed results. But according to new findings from Harvard School of T.H. Chan School of Public Health, it makes a difference whether monounsaturated fatty acids come from plants or animal products. In the first study, they separately examined two types, basically MUFA, monounsaturated fatty acid sources, in relation to heart disease. Researchers found that while MUFAs from plant-based foods such as olive oil and nuts do indeed lower risk for heart disease, MUFAs from animal products such as red meat and dairy do not provide those benefits. And this goes back to the 2008 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. I will link that up today at stephencabral.com/1726. It said this is excerpt. Previous studies did not differentiate the sources of monounsaturated fatty acids. Animal products such as red meats and high-fat dairy also contribute to MUFA intake. Although these foods are also high in saturated fats, this might explain why there have been inconsistent findings regarding total MUFA intake in relation to coronary heart disease risk. Overall, our data suggests that MUFA from plant-based foods are beneficial and should be used in replacement of fats from animal-based sources. This went back, used the dietary information of 63,442 women from that same specific study, and also about 30,000 men from the health professional follow-up. So, what does that say? Well, it says, and I'm not reading it necessarily, and this is what I want to go back to right now, and this is what I'll say, is we want to look at not all foods are created equal. So a lot of people will be saying right now, well, are those saturated fats and those fats from animal-based products and dairy products coming from animals that are grass-fed or pasture-raised, like such as the eggs and such as chicken, or from wild-based fish? So, and I agree with that, because the more omega-6s that you get, standard American diet, probably somewhere around 18 to 20 to 1 is what we see in our studies. It's not good, right? So that's an inflammatory factor. And then you have to ask the question, well, does an increase in blood cholesterol from saturated fats, from more animal, butter, fish, eggs and dairy. Yes, it does. And it can, and not all people, but it can, and absolutely at least a quarter of the population, increase the risk of increase the levels of LDL and cholesterol. So the question is, it's interesting, but we don't quite know. And this is the big revelation. If we're being very honest and open, and I always am on this show, it's that about 50% of the people who have heart attacks have high cholesterol, high LDL, above 100 or so. If we look at that, we say, well, then we want to make sure that we do not raise total cholesterol above 200, and that we really don't raise LDL above 100, maybe 110. And I would say, well, that seems like a good idea. However, a full 50% of the people that have a heart attack also have normal levels of cholesterol. So what is it? Like, what does it mean? Like, people are having heart attacks. It's the number one cause of mortality in the United States is heart disease. So what do we do? Is cholesterol a factor? And I would say this, that cholesterol is a factor. It's only one factor though. right? So we can't discount the effect of cholesterol in the body, and we need healthy levels. Without enough cholesterol, you're not producing enough testosterone, you're not producing enough progesterone, cortisol, you name it, right? You need good, healthy levels of cortisol in the body. You need it because it's helping with cell membrane function, etc. We also know that, well, about 80% or so, the cholesterol that we do manufacture, produce, is produced by the liver in the body. So again, no one's discounting any of that. However, I will say this, that there is growing evidence that the more saturated fat you do take in from animal-based products does seem to have other effects in the body as well, beyond cholesterol. So the cholesterol debate I can totally go along with, and I can say there are many factors. Like there are many factors that affect heart disease, and cholesterol is only one of them. I'm doing an entire results accelerator on cholesterol, all the factors and how to go about rebalancing the body. Because certainly when we're looking at heart attacks, blood pressure matters, blood sugar matters, stress matters, cortisol absolutely matters. Like all of these things do matter. Inflammation, of course, matters. Excuse me. So here's what we need to look at. Saturated fat, though, and I'm going to go through a few more studies right now, has been shown to cause other forms of lipotoxicity in the body and also the gut. So when we look at saturated fat, and especially those longer carbon atom chains that we talked about, palmitic acid, some stearic acid, etc., it can lead to cardiovascular diseases. It's still correlated. I just want us to know that. Insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, obesity, and gut-based issues as well. So lipopolysaccharides, et cetera, especially with saturated fats, they make a good carrier of bacteria and other pathogens from the gut out into the bloodstream, which then would cause an immune-based dysfunction and an inflammatory-based state there as well. So let's look at this. Let's break it down in more normal speak as well. So when we're looking at saturated fats, I think that we do need some in our diet. There's no doubt about that. What we don't want to do is a lot of these diets, though, that give carte blanche to eating 50, 60, 70% of your diet from fat, and it's okay if it's saturated fat. We know that not only is that not good, especially if it's coming from processed meats and other items like that, that it can lead to higher levels of cancer as well. And a lot of people that are recommending these diets, it also becomes a high-fat, high-protein diet, which we know is really detrimental to your health. So a lot of people doing keto diets, or what they believe is a keto diet, it's not a keto diet at all. A keto diet should be it should be very low in protein. It's very low in carbs, yes, but it's very low in protein. So if you're following a keto diet and it's high protein and high fat, I'm telling you right now, I mean, again, I have no dog in the race at all, but it is extremely detrimental to your health. They're probably, I mean, you can make an argument that it's even more detrimental than a high-fat, high-carbohydrate diet, which is definitely going to increase blood sugar levels, weight gain, et cetera. There's no doubt about that. But a high-fat, high-protein diet is going to cause potentially much greater risk in terms of cancer, heart disease, et cetera. So there isn't a good one, right? You can't combine high fat with any of the other macros and have it be healthy, which is why if you're following a keto, what you call a keto-based diet, it better be low in protein and it better be low in carbs, because if not, it's extremely detrimental. And if you're following one of the more keto-based diets, just make sure that you play it safe. And that's what I'm trying to teach today, is if you're going to do that, at least err on the side of caution, because you don't know how those saturated fats are going to affect you, especially if you don't even know your ApoE genotype. So I would say if you're going to go with that type of a diet, make sure that it's high in monounsaturated fats. And that goes for all the other people promoting it, doctors out there, health practitioners. Remember, the first part of being a good doctor or health coach is do no harm. And so if you recommend, and you're recommending the keto-based diet for some particular reason, then just make sure you're saying the fats that people should be getting from their diet should predominantly be plant-based. They really should. And that if you want to recommend some saturated fat, well, certainly a more beneficial type looks to be coconut oil for sure. But again, let's look at, though, nuts and seeds and avocados and olive oil as great forms of monounsaturated fats. So again, the jury's still out there in terms of saturated fats, cholesterol, and heart disease, that's for sure. But saturated fat at higher levels still is implicated in the research with causing a progression of inflammation, autoimmune issues, allergies, cancer, atherosclerosis, hypertension, and heart hypertrophy, as well as other metabolic and degenerative-based diseases. So what I'm going to do is link up the journal of, let's see where this one is published in. Well, without going too much into this, I'm going to link all of them up and all the research studies at stephencabral.com/1726, because some people will want to go more in depth and some won't want to go as in depth, and that's okay. But what we have to look at is eating good overall clean food, because although nutritional epidemiology and all the research can't give us all the answers yet, we could even look at the scientific studies, the ones saying, well, do monounsaturated fats provide benefits for the heart? Well, again, we have to look at this also with common sense. We know that monounsaturated fats are highly beneficial for overall inflammation levels of the body, for the heart, for all of those things, but they do predominantly come from a plant-based diet. And again, I am not saying that you can't eat some animal protein. I'm really not. And I'm not saying that you can't eat fish, and I'm not saying that you can't eat eggs, and I'm not saying you can't have some dairy, ideally more of a sheep or goat-based dairy, which is much easier to digest and far less allergenic to children and adults. So what I want to say is more of a balanced approach. But when you look at humans, you look at the human digestive tract, and you look at all of the benefits that we know, like the only anti-cancer diet that we know of is a diet high in brightly colored fruits and vegetables. So I just want to have common sense-based discussions as well. There can be a time and a place for lower carb diets. We do it in our practice as well. There's never a time and a place for a higher protein diet, except for body transformation. Now remember, you can be on a really high protein diet, and it can be high in fat. Again, a lot of people are talking about this with carnivore-based diet, those types of things. But do keep in mind, they will get you lean because, again, there's a lack of carbohydrates in that diet. It's not necessarily balanced, but it can work in the short term. But what we want to look at is, okay, well, what's good in the short term? And then what can we transition to that we know is healthy in the long term? And again, I don't have a dog in the race. Continued research into longevity and what's best for us. But if you're willing to put chips down on something that's most likely to win, it's going to be more of a natural human diet. It's going to be one that would be easy to access foods, fruits and vegetables and fiber, brightly colored nutrients. Again, if you have gut issues, there is a correction to this. It's not to eliminate the foods that you're sensitive to right now. In the beginning, yes, but run a candida metabolic and vitamins test. Run a bacteria and parasite stool test. Run an IgG food sensitivity test. You can do all of these on your own. You can talk to your local functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor, integrative health practitioner, or run them over at equa.life. You can find all of the labs. You can have them shipped to you pretty much anywhere in the world and run them to figure out what's going on with your gut. But if you can't eat any type of carbohydrates because you gain weight, or they cause you bloating, gas, autoimmune issues, you should figure out what the underlying root cause is to that. So then you can go back to a diet that, again, whether you look at the blue zones or whether you look at these epidemiological studies, it's your best bet. If you have a super high fat diet, high protein diet, in the long run, could you be okay? You could, but don't bet on that, right? That's the thing. It's like, don't bet on it. When things go wrong at 65 years old, you don't want to say, oh, I wish I did this, right? So what I want to do is just share with you an open mind today on why I don't believe that saturated fat should naturally be implicated in higher levels of cholesterol and whether that cholesterol even matters in terms of heart disease. We know that it's one causal factor. Let's play it safe. Let's eat healthy. Let's be healthy. Let's live healthy. And let's share this information with anyone, as I always say, you believe it could serve. Thanks so much. Take care. For all the studies that I listed today, spoke about today, head on over to stephencabral.com/1726. Take care.